right now. So please just let anybody know who wasn't able to get in on the first 100 that we are recording today's session, and they'll have the ability to watch the recording at a later date. Thank you all so much for joining today's presentation. It is the second installment for the Mechanics of Marketing webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about RFPs. We do have a little, we have a little video to show you, but we're running late, so I think we're just going to skip past that and jump right into our presentation today with a big thank you to BVH for being our webinar sponsor. And with that, Lindsey, I will toss it over to you.
Okay. Great. All right. So I just want to confirm that everyone is able to see my screen out there in Zoom land right now. Thank you all for staying with us on this call. And I'm just looking at a quick chat here to make sure everyone's on. I hope that others, I hope that we were able to catch everyone, but we're going to just do our best here to pivot and go forward with today's presentation, which is really focused on RFPs and proposals and how you can take your submittal to that next level from good to great. How do you go beyond those stated submittal requirements that are included in the instructions and really get to the heart of what the decision makers are looking for when they're evaluating AEC firms? I'm guessing that many of you, we had some poll questions. Sorry, we won't be doing those, but we did want to kind of get a good pulse of the crowd because we did have quite a great turnout for today's presentation with 190 people signed up for it. And based on my quick review of the list, we had a good mix of not only marketing and BD staff, but also technical staff at various levels from different companies, not only in Connecticut, but outside of our region here. So again, I just want to say that I'm really grateful for all of your interest in this particular topic and showing up today. And apologize again for the technical difficulties that kick things off here, but we're going to keep coasting through things. As you guys know, a big part of the sales cycle in our industry does involve the task of responding to RFPs, putting those proposals, those statements of qualifications, those interviews together. And if you've done more than 1 or 2 RFPs, you know for a fact that they come in all shapes and sizes, all kinds of variations. And the format's dictated by whoever's issuing them. So what we're going to learn about today is really how to weed through the instructions to find out not only what you have to respond to, but how you can touch on some of those other things that may not be outlined specifically in the submittal requirements. Some of you on the call may know me. I see some familiar names and faces in the little boxes up here in the chat, but some of you may not know who I am. So I wanted to just quickly say that, you know, I speak your language. I've been in this industry right out of college and ever since, and I'm going on 20 years, which is crazy to say out loud, but you know, never necessarily saw that I would have a path in AEC marketing, as I think many of you on this call probably, unless you're an engineer or an architect or studied construction, you may share that same sentiment. But right out of college, I started with a civil engineering firm as a marketing coordinator, doing RFPs and Qs and writing press releases and doing some light graphic design and Microsoft Publisher at the time. And really my path began, I moved over to a more multidisciplined architectural engineering firm at BL Companies, and kind of rose through the ranks to become a marketing manager, director of marketing, and ultimately principal of the firm. And then in 2009, I moved over to KBE Building Corporation, which was not only going from design to construction, but also going from a historically marketing focused path to more of a business development path. I learned a ton about the construction side of the business in that role, but ultimately I took an opportunity in 2010 to start Golden Egg, which is my own consulting business, in 2010. And Golden Egg was really focused on exclusively serving AEC clients. Based on my path and my passion, I wanted to stay true to what I've done my whole career and helping the firms that I enjoy working with every day. And I provide really 4 core services: strategy, graphic design, website development, and proposals, which we're diving into today. Um, Depending on the clients that I'm working with, and I work with international corporations and small startup companies, 1-2 man shops, I really wear a variety of different hats, and I plug in wherever they need me to plug in. Sometimes I'm acting as their marketing department, and sometimes acting as an extension of an in-house department. But in any event, I'm really working with them to support them in any way needed. Just really quick before we dive into the technical presentation, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on who I am as a person. There's really, when you own a business, and probably as all of you are dealing with now, working from home or otherwise, it's really hard to separate the work-life balance as we all strive for, because in my case and many of yours, they're very intertwined. Um, the name Golden Egg Concepts comes from the fact that my nickname is Goose. I picked that up early on in my career in the industry, and the name of my business connects to the Aesop's fable of the goose that laid the golden egg. And if you think about the moral behind that story, it's to not let greed destroy the source of good things in your life. And pictured on the right, you'll see my 2 children, Lenora and Lennox, aged 5 and 3. My husband, Nick, who's a firefighter for the city of Norwich. My 2 dogs, Redbone and Blue Tick Coonhounds, Barkley and Woodford, and me riding horses. I'm very into horses. I volunteer with Connecticut Draft Horse Rescue on weekends, and that's a little bit about me in a snapshot. Today, we're really going to dive into 4 core topics broken into sections. We're going to talk about the way that RFP submittal structures differ, town to town, client to client, organization to organization. We're going to talk about how you can hit on both those stated submittal requirements as well as those that are not so clearly stated. We're going to talk about how to really dig in and find out what clients really want to see shine through in your submittals. And lastly, we're going to talk about how to tailor some of those standard, I'll say, boilerplate materials. Not that I like that term, but there are the typical components of proposals, and how can you really work with what you have to make it stronger and make those messages shine through. So we'll start off with the variation in RFP submittal requirements. And one quick thing, since I'll mention this as we kind of jumped right in, if you guys have questions as I go through the presentation, feel free to send them via the chat. Sam's gonna be kind of moderating and collecting those as we go along. And Sam, you can just interrupt me when you feel that you either have a pertinent one or enough that are building up that you want me to just take a pause. I'll defer to you on that. So. All right, so the variation in RFP submittal requirements. Again, you guys do these, you know what comes with the territory, whether it's an RFQ, an RFP, an ITB, an LOI, they come named different things. They come in all different formats. Sometimes they're authored by a purchasing department. Sometimes they're authored by an owner's rep. Sometimes they're authored by some committee or other department within a municipality or organization that may have experience writing them. So you never really know what you're going to get. And they vary quite a bit depending on the agency that's issuing them and the project at hand. So this is just a bare bones example, and you guys have seen these, and sometimes it's good to have a bare bones one because you're like, all right, I've got a lot of freedom. I can kind of, do whatever I want on this one. But this is one where it's basically just like, just demonstrate that you have the experience and knowledge. Very, very simple. So that leaves a lot to interpretation in terms of how you set your proposal up. This particular one has a little bit more meat on the bones, where they outline very specifically not only the format that they want the submittal in terms of a soft cover binder, double-sided, page numbered in the bottom right corner, getting into the actual setup of the submittal and page limits, and what you specifically need to hit on within each section. So those are just 2 kind of contrasting examples that show really that they could be all over the map. I like to say, just kind of to set the tone as we continue through the rest of the presentation, proposals can get a bad rap, frankly. They're a lot of work and they can be very laborious, to use my term from one of my earlier slides. I feel that you can easily fall into a rut of feeling that they're just a very mundane administrative task that you just lose belief in and lose, the desire to keep trying on. they're really not an administrative task. I would argue that they're actually a very creative task that involves not only strategic thinking about, figuring out what these messages are and how you're going to develop those messages and convey them by writing, but also the graphic piece of it too. How are you going to make this submittal something that's engaging and something that people want to keep reading? There's a lot of different skill sets involved in proposal writing, and I would say being organized and being a good project manager is one of them, but they're not just an administrative task. I also find that in our industry, we make a hard line between BD and marketing. And I feel that proposals often land in the marketing pile. But realistically, when you think about BD, and it starts from, developing relationships and nurturing opportunities with those client relationships that you're working on, the proposal is oftentimes the last step in that process of converting a prospect to a client. So to switch it over to marketing and just have a disconnect there doesn't really make sense, because it's really the last and oftentimes most important leg of the BD sales cycle. And lastly, I find a lot of people are like, well, we can't do that because the instructions don't say that we're allowed to do that. Well, you should certainly follow the instructions to a degree, but there's some gray area that can be lived in and explored. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today with some examples. But at the end of the day, this is your best foot forward, and you need to find the way to make those messages shine and make your firm's value shine, even if the rules prohibit it. So you have to really get creative, and that's kind of a little bit about how I look at proposals and how I'd encourage you to look at them too. So just a quick check-in with Sam as we close out the first section to see if there are any questions that have come out or comments or anything else so far along the way here.
Looks like no questions so far.
Okay, great. I'm gonna keep going. Like I said, guys, just put those in the chat to Sam and we will get them answered here on screen. So now I'm going to talk about really how do you respond, how do you balance responding to the stated requirements versus those kind of not so stated requirements that are really very important. So on the left side of the slide here, you're seeing a very detailed section 4, which is submission of qualification statements, and they go into some very specific detail. I showed this on an earlier slide of, what sections they wanted to see and what page number limits they would impose on those sections, different things that they want covered in that particular section of the proposal. And then on the right side, you're seeing an unrelated section, section 5, which is the method of selection and criteria for award, oftentimes kind of called the evaluation criteria. And really the point of the slide is to illustrate that there is a disconnect between what they're asking you to submit with your bid and what they're actually evaluating your bid on. And it's important for us as marketers and technical staff involved in marketing and business development to really blend those and weave those two sections together and make sure that you're being responsive to the requirements, but also hitting on those things that they value most. So this would be an example of some submittal requirements here that the RFP called out that they'd like you to hit on. So, naturally, there's probably a section that would say, show your past experience, these project sheets, different descriptions of similar work. But they go so far as to say that they want to see experience managing the scope, schedule, and budget of similar sized public high schools. So what you'd want to do is really draw out those facts that make it similar and make it relevant and make sure that those are called out very explicitly on your project sheets. There's another requirement that they're looking for, number 2, proven capabilities to communicate. Now that's not something you see every day in a proposal, so you really have to get creative, particularly to go further, both transmitting and receiving written and oral with a variety of parties. I mean, that's pretty specific, and you almost wonder what prompted them to put that in that proposal. So think about how to weave that into some of your standard materials. Certainly RFPs talk about dollar value, similar experience, maybe site characteristics, a tight occupied site, something that would be renovated while occupied, whatever the case may be. They want to know that you can handle the type of work that they're calling out. Here's just another example where they're getting into, the type of experience that they want you to have, experience working with different state agencies that might be involved on the particular project, different school districts that you've worked for. So again, these are on that usually after the submittal requirements. This is that additional information that's important, but you have to figure out how to pull it in and weave it together. This is where what I like to call bonus sections come into play really nicely. So if the theme of your overall proposal is hire our firm, because a lot of times I hear people talk about multiple themes, we have to have different themes of our proposal. And I would say, well, there's really one theme, and that theme is to convey that you are the right firm for the task at hand. You can have supporting points to that theme, but that's the theme. And really, you can look to have these bonus sections help you drive that theme home. I like to think of a couple areas for bonus sections being an executive summary, almost like a Cliff Notes version of what they're about to embark on reading, because a lot of these proposals that you guys know can be, 50 to 100 or more pages based on all these requirements. So an executive summary is a nice way to kind of cue it up and summarize some of those points, those softer points, or those evaluation criteria that may not be called out specifically in the rest of your table of contents. Another thing to do too might be a concluding statement. Again, not typically asked for in the submittal requirements, but a nice way to tie it all together. And I always remember from school, they would say, with any writing class, you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. So you kind of drive that home in 3 ways. And a executive summary and a concluding statement are nice kind of bookends to your proposal if you think about it that way. One other idea that I like to encourage people to do, typical sections are key personnel resumes and project sheets. A nice way to kind of weave those evaluation criteria in is within the introductory section to the project sheets or the team. You might get into like a little one-page narrative before you get into 15 project sheets of the same exact type of work that kind of sums it all up and says, hey, these are the ones that have lead components. These are the ones that were occupied during construction. These had referendum, requirements, whatever the case may be, to kind of table it out and set them up for what they're about to see. It just further reinforces the points that are relevant to what they're looking to see. And keep in mind, your proposal is one in a stack of several, and they're long, and they're, it takes some time for these reviewing committees to go through, and you want to keep it as straight in their minds as possible, as in terms of what you're trying to convey with your submittal. Bonus sections are a nice way to drive those points home.
So Lindsey, we do have some questions.
Okay, great.
So one of the questions is regarding the communication. On a couple slides back, you had mentioned like, how do you communicate? What was that exactly? It was what? This one, yeah.
Capabilities to communicate.
Proven capabilities to communicate. Do you have any like suggestions as to how you might include that into your proposal without, do you straight up say what it is, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest, this was from a real RFP that I did with a client, and that one kind of threw me a little bit because it's not something that is typically asked for, and it's probably not something that's going to translate well to presentation in an RFP response. One of the things that we ultimately ended up doing for that one, this particular client was an owner's representative, and we actually used some samples of written reports, whether they be weekly reports or kind of monthly, more detailed project summary reports that kind of demonstrated some of the written tools that they use to convey, different things about the project status to the involved team members on the design and construction side. We also talked about using, it sounds obvious, but it does speak to this, but using Outlook to kind of schedule meetings and make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page with login information, whatever they need to get, meeting locations, kind of having that be the central repository for meetings. We also talked about technology, using platforms, even if they're technologically challenged, whether it be GoToMeeting or Zoom or whatever the case may be, which I think is becoming more important to be able to be comfortable with in today's day and age, where there's a lot of limitations on how much in-person contact we can have. So
Yeah.
To my knowledge, thinking back, that was kind of the stuff that we used to speak to this, examples of actual reports that show the type of deliverable that they would be receiving as a client for status updates, sample emails, things like that, just kind of the routine correspondence that goes with a project like this, just giving them actual examples.
Yeah. And for, you know, with respect to your last comment about video conferencing, I mean, that's the way it is now. So one of the questions we got was, in the COVID-19 era, video interviews are now the norm. Would it be perceived as beneficial to write about the firm's ability to communicate virtually, be it web meetings, electronic document review and sharing, etc.?
Yes, I think that that is becoming increasingly important. And I've actually had the experience of going through 2 video interviews since this whole COVID-19 situation. One of them was more of a live, kind of a Google Meet type of situation where the firm was kind of actually engaging with multiple committee members that had actually some technological difficulties themselves, technical difficulties in terms of mics not being muted and cameras and people taking over screen shares and stuff. And the other interview was a little bit different in that it was a pre-recorded interview that we submitted to a particular facilities department that was evaluating that team. So that was a little bit different too, because you almost had this pressure that you had to kind of like nail it, you know, it was a 10-minute interview that we were limited to. And it's hard. And I think that as things go forward, as we come out of the COVID situation and hopefully begin to get back to normal, I do think some of these tools, like these virtual meeting tools, will remain in place for kind of routine meetings, and even building committee meetings, project status meetings, and even to engage experts that may not be in your office that may have something to add to that particular project. It eliminates the need to kind of have them fly out to be on site for something. You can really use it to your advantage, and to the degree that you can talk about that and convey that and convey your comfort with it, I think is very helpful in a proposal.
Yeah. We have a question here regarding the executive summary. Do you think it is a good idea to summarize everything in a cover letter?
So yes, I think it depends. If an executive summary is not allowed or not something that you intend to submit as part of your bid, then I would say that your cover letter could and should kind of act as an executive summary, where you're highlighting those points, you're touching on those criteria, you're pointing people to different sections and giving them a sense of what they're going to expect when they flip past the table of contents. So a lot of times the content of a cover letter can kind of be somewhat similar to what I would typically put in an executive summary. It's a little bit more of a formal inclusion in a bid to put an executive summary in, but I think that as long as you're getting those points in one way or the other, I think if you do an executive summary, you could kind of lighten that in the cover letter and really show something from the heart, which we're going to get into some examples on cover letters in a little bit here. But you could use that to keep it brief and just set the tone for why you're excited about this particular opportunity.
And this is an interesting one. How do you feel about ignoring requested information if the information doesn't reflect well on your firm?
I think about it all the time because there's a lot of times where I have clients where I'm asking them a question and a kickoff meeting, like, well, how many libraries have we done? They're like, we actually haven't done any. And I'm like, well, that's a bit of an uphill battle for me. I tend to not ignore requirements, but I'm probably very type A about that. And I would never want to omit something and have that be reason to disqualify the firm that I'm representing. So I find that I touch on it, even if it's lightly. And even if it's something where it's like state, the last 5 elementary schools that you've done in Massachusetts, I might say, we currently have not done an elementary school in Massachusetts. However, we've done 17 of them in Connecticut. And here's why these are still relevant, even though they're not in Mass. So I don't like to just skip it, because I want to make sure they know that we read it and we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. But I do know that some of these requirements can be, they can kind of handcuff you, particularly if you're trying to break into a new market, or you're up against competition that's going to maybe show better in that particular area. I'd say give it your best shot at responding to it honestly, and know that it might come up in an interview and you're going to have to back that up with that same answer.
Yeah.
The last point on that I would just say is sometimes if it's a truly like silly requirement, which you will see in RFPs, because sometimes you read them and you're like, what is that even in there for? Sometimes you can use an opportunity to get clarification by submitting a formal question and be like, I understand that you're looking for, elementary schools in Massachusetts. Would it be okay to show them in, other states in New England too? Like, you can put it out there and maybe open it up a little bit. But I'd say address it.
Yeah. Do you think maybe that, I mean, I'm just throwing this out there, maybe that is a little different when you're talking about like a public RFP versus a private? Do you think maybe in the private world you have a little bit more wiggle room versus public, or?
I think in general, from my experience, the structural format and requirements are a little bit more stringent on the public side. So I think there is a little more wiggle room in general on the private sector side of things. But at the end of the day, I think it is it's a first impression of your firm that sometimes they're getting, and you want to show that you've done a good job, you're thorough, you're analytical, you went through things section by section. And I don't like to just skip things, even if it does kind of position you differently. But I'd look to clarify it, and to the degree that you can be vague and maybe not like bullet it out exactly, but broadly state, we have a lot of experience in this particular facility type, and we're going to get into that. Try to hit on it to the degree that you can.
Yeah. And the one more question we have right now is, what do you suggest be included when they welcome additional information of your choosing, and you already feel like the response is already quite comprehensive?
Yeah, I would sometimes say don't do anything. It's just adding volume. And I think by nature, our industry and even as marketers, we're like, well, we could put our brochure in there, or we could, throw a something else in there. And it's like, what else could we do? They want additional information. I think that's just a door opener for if you have either, something that truly wasn't hit on or requested, you could include that there. But some examples would, beyond the executive summary and the concluding statement, that are good additional examples to include. Sometimes I'll try to get reference letters, perhaps for the project manager, performance evaluations, if you're maybe in the transportation world, from different DOTs that, would have, input on your performance on past projects that are similar. Things like that might be nice little ways to document. The other thing too is alternate solutions. Sometimes what they're asking for may not be, from your professional standpoint, the best way to, get from point A to B. So you might take the opportunity on the additional information section to spell out kind of a new way of doing things that worked for someone else on something different.
Yeah.
And lastly, I've even seen people include publications. Let's say you had a nice feature or white paper, or not a white paper, but more of an article or something that kind of positioned you and your firm as an opinion leader on a particular topic that's relevant to what you're going after. You could certainly put that in there, but don't feel obligated just because they're asking for it. If you feel that you've said enough, put your pencil down.
Nice. I just had an idea. What if you included like a video about why you wanted to do the project?
Yeah, that's very different. I like that a lot. And particularly in situations for electronic submittals, which hopefully with all this COVID stuff too, will be another nice thing that comes out of this. Although I still see people asking for printed copies bound and, putting binders and times 12. But yeah, to the degree that you can show off your personality and sell your team. I mean, at the end of the day, we're professional services marketers and providers, and we're selling ourselves. And to the degree that they can make a connection with you on a project that's probably going to be long, it's show it off, show them what they're getting. So that's another great, very creative way to kind of demonstrate some of those softer things that don't come through in the submittal requirements.
That's all the questions we got right now, Lindsey.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm so glad you guys are posting questions, and I love the back and forth. This is great. So thank you. Thank you for those that submitted. All right, let me get back into my formal slides here. So this is, I guess, segueing, now that we've kind of set the tone for probably what you all see and deal with every day in terms of the different formats and differentiating between those requirements that are stated and those kind of other things that are being asked for but not specifically asked for, how do you really uncover, even beyond those evaluation criteria, what is important to clients? So there's been a lot of research done specific to our industry that would prove that really the firms are selected, AEC firms are selected a lot of times on kind of the warm and fuzzy factors, such as, you know, partnership and trust and, you know, the ability to be leaders on a project. A lot of times you're either representing, you know, staff that may not have that expertise, or a building committee that may not, you know, be available to do things during the day. You're really being that leader, and that's really what clients are looking for. And some of these things are harder to convey and rank and score, kind of like that communication example. One of the questions was about, you know, how do you really show them that you can communicate effectively? You know, so these factors are very, very important to think about as you get into your proposal preparation. And, you know, really to me, the best way to get into the hearts and the souls of the clients that we're submitting proposals to is to do your homework, as old-fashioned as that sounds. There's a lot of research that can be done, not only relative to the particular opportunity that you're positioning yourself for, whether it be a new building or, you know, a new athletic field or a streetscape project, whatever the case is, but also that particular client. You know, how are they structured? What's their culture? And Sam, to your point about a video, you know, that when you really understand the culture and the heart of an organization that you're pitching, and to the degree that you can draw parallels between them and your people and your company, like that's a home run. You know, there's a synergy there. There's just a chemistry that I think would be really important to convey. You can kind of look at past projects that maybe that client's undertaken and think about, you know, well, hey, they always use this one architect just for interiors, or they're definitely going to have this environmental firm involved, whatever the case is. They really like to do stuff design build. You can kind of learn a lot from what's been undertaken to date with a particular client. And even, hey, maybe this facilities director for this particular university is new and they were at a different, you know, at a hospital before or at a different university. You can kind of, you know, do your research and use LinkedIn and lean on your network. Chances are, you know, even on this call with, you know, over 100 people here, you know, it's that whole 6 degrees of separation theory that, you know, we can really kind of figure out anything we want with, you know, the people in our network. Lean on that network and encourage them to lean on you so that you can return the favor. But ultimately, you want to do your research, you want to do your homework, and you want to be in a position to know what you're talking about when you actually have that face time with those decision makers. I wanted to just share an actual, like, real life example. Like, how does this all sounds great in theory, but like, how does this actually work? And for you, those of you on the call that are business developers, you know, either full-time, part-time, part of your technical responsibilities, marketers with a side of BD, whatever it is, anyone can really play a role in business development, and it is a team approach. But I have an example that I just wanted to share with you for one of my clients, that it started as a project that actually just a site, like a plot of land in town that I had read about in the little local bulletin or Gazette newspaper that we get stuffed in the mailbox that usually ends up on the curb, just that I don't want to read. But for some reason I read it and I, on the front cover, it was saying, you know, something about a parcel of land being identified for a possible municipal facility that they were looking to construct. And I followed the, you know, the biweekly newspapers, and it began to progress to, yes, you know, they're definitely going to move forward with building new on this site, and they're looking for residents to become part of a building committee and so forth. So it began to kind of snowball. And at this point, I brought it up to the firm that I work with that I thought this might be a good fit for, and, you know, began to become on their radar to track. And at the point that it got to in following the story, you know, we learned that a building committee was coming out. So we followed, you know, we got on the website, we began to find out who the members of that committee were. They were publishing agendas. They were having these public meetings, you know, every whatever Tuesday at 7 p.m. in town hall, whatever the case may be. And these are open to the public. Whether you live in that particular community or not, you can go and you can really hear straight from the horse's mouth what is going on with this project and what they're seeing. And a lot of times you'll see these committees kind of trying to figure things out around the table. as just representatives of the public. Sometimes there's one or two or more that may have design or construction expertise to kind of be the leader of that committee, but a lot of times they're just trying to kind of make sense of it and figure out the right steps to go through to get the different professional services needed to push the project along. You know, as you begin to go to these meetings, there might be opportunities to make some connections with some of the members of the building committee, meet some of the building committee as you go to these meetings and continue to show face. And you can also learn a lot about how they're going through procuring other services that might be ahead of yours sequentially in the process. They may be talking about issuing an RFP for a feasibility study where they need an architect and you might be the CM. So you're a little further down the road, but you can kind of see the process that they go through and what's important to them when they're going through in the meetings very publicly, you know, what they liked, what they didn't like, how many, you know, relevant facilities they thought this guy included versus that guy. It's amazing what you learn going to these building committee meetings. They are not the most fun thing to do, but they are open to the public and you can learn a ton just by showing up and really, as I tell my kids, put your listening ears on. Just stay quiet and listen. It's amazing. And what's reflected in the notes or the minutes, I should say, is definitely not the high level detail that you'll hear in person. And again, it's unfiltered and it's amazing. So if you haven't gone to a building committee meeting in your life, I would encourage you to try it out because it's very interesting. And if you live in that particular town, you can actually raise your hand and get involved and comment. So check it out. But this was a quick life cycle of one opportunity in particular that I'm helping a firm track. And at the last committee meeting, which was right before the COVID crisis kind of broke, you know, they were talking about a draft RFP for the particular service that this client would be interested in. And I was in the crowd and they gave just anyone in the crowd, which there were not many of us, an actual copy of the RFP. So you bring that home to the team and helps you get a leg up on the preparation of you know, the bid when it is your turn to go after it. So that's just a quick real life example of how you can kind of, you know, immerse yourself in with a committee and hopefully make some connections with them before the RFP hits the streets. And that's what we're all instructed to do. Do your homework, pre-position your firm before it hits the streets, because it's arguably too late because other firms have been doing this.
Lindsey, it's so funny that this example starts with you reading about it in a paper, because I know that I've heard many people say, oh, once you see it in the paper, you know, the opportunity's too late. You've already missed your chance.
Yeah.
So I do wonder if that's like a public versus private thing, or if that's just, you know, keep your eyes peeled because you never know what has already happened and what
yeah.
is here.
I think this particular example is definitely public, and I think they're, again, going back to kind of the formality that surrounds the public procurement process. You know, I think that this works in this case. I think sometimes, like, let's say a particular corporation or private university, whatever the case may be, let's say you read about something in the Hartford Business Journal, oh, Hartford Hospital's taken over some space here. At that point, it probably is too late, because all the work to get to the point where that article was published, you know, there's people kind of in the mix, not to mention the firms that you compete with that are already in there and have a relationship with that client. So I guess I just bring it up from the standpoint, it's good to just read and keep your eyes open, because you never know what might pop up. And, you know, if it can't help you, maybe it can help someone that you're working with. And, you know, and hopefully people are doing that for you too in return. And that's how the good world works. So once you've done this pre-positioning and you guys have like, all right, cool, we're into this, we're feeling solid about things, like we know who the decision makers are, we know what's important to them, we've been going to these meetings, as painful as they've been, every week or whatever the case is, your head is full of great ideas about what's important to them and what they're envisioning from a design standpoint. You know, is it one story? Is it two stories? Is it, you know, tongue-in-cheek $5 million or $10 million, square footages? They'll just throw things around and you just listen, you just take it all in. But you come back with the team and you really circle the wagons on this opportunity. Get everybody involved, not only the actual staff that's going to be on this project, but maybe people that have worked with this particular client in the past or know them somehow, or work with a sub-consultant pretty exclusively that does a lot of work with that particular client. Get it on the table. You know, think about challenges that they might face with this particular project. If it's new construction, if the town has to acquire the land, is there a referendum? What are these different you know, challenges that might come up that you've helped others solve on similar projects, and think about how you can tie that all together. You know, think about where other firms, and this may take consulting your network and doing your homework, but where have other firms that have worked for this community or this particular organization or corporation, where have they fallen short, or what have they done really well? You know, having that insight about what your competition is doing can be very, very helpful. And then thinking about the team composition, you know, I think with a lot of interviews, one of the questions have touched on interviews. Many people, private and public sector alike, want to know who they will be dealing with in the throes. The days of the president and the CEO coming in and doing the dog and pony show and then assigning, you know, Bobby back at the office to the job, that's not what they want. They want Bobby showing up and hearing it from him, because that's going to be their frontlines guy or gal, and that's the person you're selling. And when you're putting together a team for these projects, you really need to think about beyond the technical capabilities of that person. They may be the best person to design this or oversee the construction of it, but can they sell? Can they position? Can they present themselves in that manner that's so credible to a committee that they're maybe uncomfortable in front of? Think about the personalities, because again, it comes back to a long project and the chemistry that you want to make sure is there with your team you're putting out there and the people that you're going to be working for. And think about sub-consultants too. You know, how do you supplement your team? Even if you don't maybe need a sub for that particular role, they might add a little feather in your cap that, you know, you may give up a little piece of the pie, but it's better to give up a piece of the pie than get no pie at all. So think about the composition of your team from a technical standpoint and a relationship personality standpoint. So really it's about figuring out during this kind of kickoff meeting or circling of the wagons, what is our value? What is really going to set us apart on this particular project, and how can we drive that home? Lastly, once the RFP is actually out, you know, again, probably a little bit more on the public side than the private side, but there tend to be a, like, you know, all right, now it's on the streets. We're a little bit limited in terms of what we can do. But sometimes in the submittal, there'll be a main point of contact identified that you can call or email with questions. Sometimes they want you to submit formal questions. So, you know, certainly follow the rules in that regard. But I would say whenever possible, to the degree that it's not prohibited, give a call to that main point of contact instead of emailing. I think just as a society and as people, and I'm guilty of this myself, it's just quicker to, you know, while you're at a red light, just send a quick email and be like, done, versus making a phone call, particularly if you have kids or dogs or whatever at home that are going to be disruptive. You know, I'll just shoot an email. Well, I will say that you definitely get a different answer when you have someone on the phone versus when you send an email. If you guys just email me a question, I might be, not to say matter of fact, but I'm going to answer the question in, you know, a written response. Versus if you had me on the phone, I might be like, you know, I'm glad you asked. I wasn't really sure what I was looking for. I kind of worded it this way, but what I'm really getting at is this. And I think it's just human nature to like elaborate and just kind of like we talked about additional information, send it. Like, let's just keep filling it up. Like, you're going to just expand, and you might get a little nugget in that conversation that you wouldn't have gotten in a written email in response to your question. So think, to the degree that it's not prohibited, think about opportunities to do that. At the end of the day, with any questions, you really want to do your best to make sure that you have a good understanding of what they're looking for, because sometimes they aren't clear in the RFP. We know that. You want to get a sense of their schedule, their budget. That's often not published, or sometimes it's not published. You can really get a sense of what they're thinking versus what you might be thinking. You know, at the end of the day, you really want to make sure it's apples to apples, because firms in this industry in Connecticut, for example, for S&PS Connecticut of this call, we're looking at that sector. But, you know, I would say that firm to firm, generally the rates are, the hourly rates and things like that are somewhat comparable. So when you get a bid result in and you see that, you know, there's just a huge swing, like, wow, this firm was like $80,000 cheaper than us, or, you know, $100,000 higher than us, you know, that to me indicates that it's not apples to apples. And that's obvious. So, you know, really trying to level the playing field up front. You want to make sure that, you know, these questions publish exactly what they're looking for. And sometimes forcing a formal response will eliminate any gray areas, so that you can really make sure that you're being competitive. And lastly, I just have a point on there to understand the weight, if it's that formal, of these different evaluation criteria that are involved in the submittal. You know, how fee is going to be the number one thing. Like, okay, that's good to know. Or fee, we're going to look at it, but really what we want to know is this, that, or the other thing. So getting a sense in submitting your questions of what's most important to them. And sometimes submitting questions, you'll end up no-going it. A couple RFPs that I've looked at with some of my clients where the scope was a little bit undefined might result in them saying, hey, we want someone on site full-time 40 hours a week. Well, we can't do that. So that's just better to know now than go through the process, because as you guys know, it's time and money to put these things together. Okay, I want to take a quick break to see if we have any questions before we segue into our last section of the webinar.
So I don't see any questions yet, but feel free to type them in, guys. So it is 1:30, which is when we were originally scheduled to stop, but we're going to keep on going. If you can't stay on because you got another call, I know yesterday I think I did 10 conference calls and webinars. So I get it. I get that you are scheduled back to back to back. So if you have to hop off, that's okay. We are going to make this recording available to everybody. And if you have any questions that, you know, maybe we haven't gotten to this, to, you know, send those questions to me and I'll make sure we get them answered on the recording before we end the presentation. So thank you all.
Yeah, and I just want to personally thank those of you that do have to sign off right now. Again, we're sorry for the false start here with the previous platform, and we thank you for those of you that jumped over to Zoom here. I'm very grateful to have so many of you signed up, and just want to thank you for your time being here today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, believe it or not, we did a lot of troubleshooting on that other platform.
We did, and we definitely test drove it, not only yesterday but today as well. So I don't have answers to what went down there, but I'm glad we figured a solution out here.
Yeah.
But thank you for those of you that are dropping off, and we will publish that recording. So I'll segue into this last chapter, so to speak. And again, questions, keep them coming at Sam. But really the last part of this is to focus on how to tailor some of those boilerplate materials. And by boilerplate, I mean kind of those traditional, very expected, regardless of procuring agency, things that go into a submittal. Resumes, project sheets, firm overview, you know what I'm talking about. How can you make those shine and customize them to the submittal at hand? So kiss the canned responses goodbye, because that is a thing of the past. And like I said, if anyone's telling you proposals are administrative, that may be the only time that I would think they would be administrative, when you're doing a save as and literally just swapping the logo on the cover, changing out the client name, doing a Control F and finding the name and moving on to the next one. Really, you want to put the thought and the effort into these to make sure that the time you're investing is well spent and it's aligning with the needs of the people that you're pitching. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, you really want to have that one proposal theme. Hire us. Okay, why? You know, so you want to kind of come up with pursuit specific points that drive that home. And your points that support hire us should not be the same whether you're chasing a school or a library or a senior living community. They should all be very unique to that particular client and opportunity. So think about that. Really come up with, you know, talking points that roll up to that umbrella, hire us. There's two pieces to the proposal response, and you know, as a kind of graphic designer perspective, I would say, you know, there's the easy on the eyes perspective. You want to make sure that it's readable, it flows, it looks professional. You don't look like the firm that, did a, half-baked job on it. You really want to shine. And I work with a lot of firms that are smaller and are competing against very large firms. And one of the things that I consistently get from them is, we need you to help make us look bigger than we are, or we need you to help us, really kind of get in there and rub elbows with the big guys. Because, particularly in Connecticut, you see a lot of that where you have, 1 and 2 man or woman shows competing against kind of that mid-range firm, competing with these national firms that have offices in the Glastonbury or whatever the case is. So it's all over the map. And you really want to make sure that no one's getting distracted from the content of your proposal by focusing on the quality looking not so sharp. And there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of break up the technical content with lists and tables and photos and infographics. It's probably not new information to any of you guys, and you're probably doing some of that right now, but I'm just reinforcing that point. It does make it easier to read, particularly when you are one in a pile of 10 other submittals. So keep that in mind. To the degree that you can kind of strive for that magazine quality feel, I understand that it's not a brochure, but it's some sales materials and it's a best foot forward. So think about that. In addition to the graphic piece, it's the content piece. So that's equally, if not more important than the graphic piece, is what you're saying. And we talked about that leading up to this slide. It's really getting to the hearts of what these decision makers want to hear in their proposal. It's making that connection. And it's saying it directly. Again, I'm going to say it again. Our industry just wants to keep elaborating. I'm probably doing it myself a little bit right now, but you just want to keep talking and driving that point home. But it can be said almost always in fewer words, more concisely, more succinctly, and keep your reader in mind when you're doing that. And also keep in mind, again, maybe more so on the public side, but certainly in the private sector as well, some of the people reading your proposal may not be an architect or an engineer or have a construction background or any of that. So we throw jargon and acronyms around like frisbees in our industry, and we want to really rein that in. And you can use them, but define them and make sure that you're speaking to the level of your reader, which that pre-work helps you find out. Is this a technical panel that knows what I'm talking about? Or is it, kind of a publicly comprised group of residents that are trying to just do the best for their community? All right, so we're going to go through, to conclude today's presentation, some of those specific proposal components, those boilerplate pieces. But I do want to say that these are ideals to strive for, and I do not do these every single time on every single proposal. I'm sorry for those of you that are clients of mine on the line. The cat's out of the bag. We all know that time, time is of the essence. And when you build more time into your schedule, you have time to do this kind of, take it from a B+ to an A+. Like, go that next level, go deeper, dig deeper, and put that polish on it. When you have time in your schedule, that's when this really happens. But I encourage you to kind of think about your next proposal. Maybe you have one that's due next week or coming up that you've been working on. Think about employing at least one of these ideas on your next proposal. So the cover letter. One of the questions earlier, I talked about the cover letter kind of doubling as an executive summary, and as I had answered that question, like, yes, that is definitely a great utilization of your cover letter. But in the case that you can include an executive summary as a standalone, you might want to just let your cover letter do the job of just driving home all the work that you've done to get familiar with this project and this opportunity. You understand their needs, you've done it before, and you've solved the same challenges for other clients. I'm going to point you to these sections of my proposal to give you that proof, and just be direct. Show them why this is important to you. Time after time, I read proposals like, oh, hey, use this as a jump off point, Linz, for a cover letter. And they're, so predictable, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, because I've certainly written some that start with this too, but, we are pleased to submit this proposal to provide blah, blah, blah. Or established in 1984, Company Inc. provides blah, like a long list of things that may not even be relevant to the task at hand. So I challenge you to kind of shelf that canned language and go deeper and speak to the people that are reading this. And I give an example of a letter. This is from a couple of years ago, but I worked with an architect on an RFP response for a Boys and Girls Club facility. It was a new ground up facility And in this particular example, the two architects, they were brothers, and they were partners in this firm. And they went to that club growing up, the club that was, you know, basically this new one was going to be replacing. And they talked to me when I asked them straight up, like, what is important about this project to you? Like, what are the points in this proposal during that Circle the Wagons meeting? And they were like, Linz, like, we are who we are today because we went to the club. And I'm like, that's got legs, guys. Like, we got to grab that and just run with it. And they meant it. It was very sincere. It was something that they could truly back up in an interview and come across very genuine. Put that in your letter. Like, that is such a nice, refreshing, like, read for somebody that's gone through 15 that start with established in 1987. This firm provides. Like, really just get to the point of why this matters to you. It's refreshing. Firm profile, another very predictable piece that goes into everything. It can be part of your SOQ or your RFP response, but sometimes people are like, hey, can you just print me out a firm profile and go into a lunch meeting? Like, it can also be this like rogue piece that just gets emailed to people or printed and sent off. The biggest thing that I see with firm profiles is that it's, you know, you guys may have heard of the term features versus benefits selling. It's very features focused. So, our firm has XYZ number of employees. We have offices in these particular states. We utilize technology. I hope that you would, given the work that we do. You know, we have experience in these different market sectors, which may or may not be applicable to the project that you're pitching. Very fact-based, very features-focused. Instead, I would encourage you to think about the benefits of these features. And this is a challenge because a lot of times I ask people, okay, well, you have 6 offices. Like, what does that mean for me, the client? Or, hey, you have this particular technology you utilize, or you're structured this way. What does that mean? And they're like, I kind of get crickets back sometimes. So this one's going to take a Circle the Wagons meeting in and of itself, because it's really gets into the heart of your firm positioning and really that value, and what are you delivering due to all these features that are defining your firm? What does that mean for the clients? You know, really taking the focus off of just you as much as it is your firm profile telling your story. How does that story deliver value to the people that are reading it? The technical approach is another section that is often included in a submittal. It sometimes is asked for, and it's sometimes included by default to either back up a pricing structure that's by phase or whatever the case is. And I see a lot of times the focus on, this is our firm, this is our process, these are steps we go through. But what I encourage you to think about is, what does that mean for them? This is our process, and this is how we engage you, the client, to share your ideas. And this is your building at the end of the day, or this is your project. Here's how we bring you and other stakeholders and other design team members into it to make sure that you're getting that deliverable that you want. So your standard approach may be a good backbone, but I think to the degree that you can kind of expand upon that and build in those, make it relevant pieces to the people that are reading it, that not only explain their role in your process, but why those steps are important to go through, and why, you know, if anything, it kind of justifies your cost and your schedule. You know, we're not just going to whip this together with no input. We have a process, and here's how it works, and this is why we do it. And it's proven to be a process that has worked to give us the input we need to end up with better designs or better whatever. So get into your approach, but explain the value of that approach. Project sheets come with everything. We're always doing cut sheets or project sheets or descriptions of our jobs, whatever you want to call them. My God, I have seen these run the gamut from just, you know, slip sheets in Word that have a photo and a little description, whatever the case may be. Sometimes they're just calling out stats, you know, size, cost, delivery method, whatever. But that's factual information. That's good. That helps kind of gauge the size and the scope of the job. But again, when you're submitting these project sheets in response to a specific opportunity, you want to connect your project experience to their particular need. So talk about the connection. Why is this relevant? Even if on the surface it may not look relevant. Like, let's say you're going after a library, and I'm dealing with the firm that says, hey, we haven't ever done a library. Well, what have you done that's kind of somewhat in the wheelhouse of the library? Well, we've done a lot of schools, they have libraries, we did a community center that had a media center. Cool. You know, let's think about how we can maybe rewrite the standard project sheet description that talks about the square footage and, you know, design features of the overall community center. And let's hit on the actual features of the media center in that community center to tie it to the library. And for the photo, let's not use just that beautiful exterior that we always use for every time the project sheet goes in. Let's get an interior of the media center. That might make someone that's flipping through it connect the dots. They might see a community center and be like, this is a library. Why would they do that? You know, so you want to make sure that you're kind of greasing the wheels a little bit and giving them something that's going to feel relevant, even if, you know, it may not be exactly what they're asking for. You got to put your best foot forward with what you have. Resumes, similar thing in terms of, you know, the quality of the images, which I didn't specifically touch on, but on the project sheet slide, you know, you don't want to use poor quality images. You don't want to use irrelevant images and exterior when we should be looking at the science lab specifically. Really make sure you're using a good photo, because it's distracting if it's not a good photo. Same on the resumes. Use a professional headshot. Again, I think headshots became more and more commonplace on resumes, I would say, over the past 10 to 15 years, maybe 10 years. I don't know. I remember early on in my careers, it was very rare to see headshots on resumes. And now it's like everybody does it. And it's almost dangerous to the point where people are taking selfies in their cubicle or, you know, in their kitchen, and they're winging them in there. And it's just not your best foot forward. So I always try to say, like, let's invest in the headshots, standard backgrounds, or even if they're not standard, somewhat, you know, consistent and feeling like it's coordinated. And really the biggest thing on the resumes that I want to make a point of is almost all the time I see people cutting and pasting the project sheet description. So, you know, we're talking about the superintendent and his description says, you know, this particular hospital. And the description just reads, you know, square footage, just facts and figures from the project sheet. Ideally, what you want to do is dive in a little deeper and talk about, as a superintendent, what did he or she do on that particular project? They can get those descriptions and facts and features on the project sheet for that hospital that you included in the previous section. Let's hone in on what they did personally in that role, because most of you are going to have situations where you're showing the same project on 7 people's resume in a row. And rather than the person being like, okay, I get it, it's 1,800 square foot of interior fit out, I know. Talk about, well, as the project executive, it was this and he did this. As the project manager, she did this and did that, and this is, you know, really get into their role and how that's different. And same with the project sheet. You want to demonstrate the relevancy of the jobs you're listing to the one that you're going after, to the degree that you can. And sometimes even it's subtle, but even in the title. So instead of just listing, you know, community center, retitle that on the resume, media center within community center. Okay, like that sounds silly, but it's a little bit of extra touch that I think does tie it back to what's important to the reader. All right, I'll take a couple questions, and then my last slide is really, how do you overcome these day-to-day challenges of dealing with RFPs in the context of everything else you have on your plate, and how can you put your best foot forward for the next one? So do we have any questions, Sam?
We do. We have some really good ones.
Okay.
So,
take a drink.
Well, here's a softball, hopefully.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody is dying to know what font this presentation is in. They love it.
Gotham Rounded.
Gotham.
For asking. Yes, it is Gotham Rounded, and it is, to be specific and to show you, let's see if I can jump to slide 1. Nope. Yep. So it's the same font that's used in my logo.
Nice. Hashtag branding. So here's another question. So if you are a small firm, a couple of people, and you're submitting on projects against large firms, do you suggest acknowledging your small firm size and spin it as a benefit to the project? Or do you try to make yourself sound larger and then be more competitive with the big guys?
I like the first option. But I would also say that your pre-positioning work that hopefully you're able to do may indicate the preference of the decision maker. They might want that everyday household name that's recognized. I mean, AEC firms' names might not be household names, but they may just have a comfort level. And you see this a lot with the big national firm that has worked everywhere. They're not a new company. They're not a small business. They may just have that, and that's an uphill battle to fight. I'm not going to lie. But I say be true to who you are. Don't oversell who you are. I think from a look and feel and polish perspective, you should compete with the big guys in that regard. But I think own who you are. Be a small business and demonstrate what those advantages are. You're going to get principal level involvement. You're going to have a team that's maybe more flexible and less governed by corporate guidelines, whatever the case may be. What those little pieces of differentiators that you can extract from your role as a small firm, make that what comes out, and be true to who you are. But try to figure out before you write that letter and make that statement what that committee is which way they're kind of leaning, because there is some comfort in the bigger firms and the bigger names. But you can kind of find your own voice in that and show some differentiators to at least make them scratch their head and say, well, maybe we should think about a small business.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, I would say the biggest question I think people have when you're talking about a small firm versus a large firm is, what happens if so-and-so gets hit by a bus, And if you can address that concern in some way, I mean, I wouldn't suggest directly saying anything about like that.
Right.
But if you can subtly or somehow message that throughout, like you're going to be totally supported or whatever it is. I just think if you can key in on that, I think that's oftentimes the big concern there.
Yeah. And to be honest, Sam, to that point, I get that sometimes, because Golden Egg is a one-woman show. What you see is what you get, and she's here in this little box. And people are like, God, and let's think about it. I've had 2 kids in the past 10 years. I've had certain situations that I wasn't able to work, and and I might get hit by a bus, God willing, but God willing, I don't. But you have to just listen, things are going to happen, and you have to deal with it, but to the degree that you can, if there are other team members involved, and this goes back to your technical approach, and the way that you guys manage projects, building in those redundancies. So if someone is unavailable, or whatever, there are other members of the team that can come in and pinch hit or whatever the case is. Things happen. People are people. And I think it's unfair to maybe rule someone out because they are a sole provider and say, well, what if you aren't around? Well, I might not be. What if you aren't around? You know what I mean? I would fight back with that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the client is going to go with what their level of comfort is. And some people, and I deal with this too. I mean, as a marketing communications consultant, there are some people that the one-woman show, like, you get me, you're dealing with me, in whatever capacity I'm helping you, that's what they like. And some people vibe with more of an agency type of feel and flow. And, everybody's got their own preferences, and you won't be everybody's cup of tea. I know I'm not. And you just, you go where you're welcome, and you find your fit. And the fact of the matter is you couldn't do all the work for everybody. So it's good that there are some people that might go elsewhere. Look at it that way.
Here's another question. How do you help leadership understand why going rogue in the cover letter is so important, and how do you get them comfortable with a new way of doing things?
That is a great question. It is very challenging to kind of spin the way that things have always been done, because that typical start to the cover letter that I showed, hey, we started in this year, we provide these services, we're excited to submit our proposal. Literally every firm does it. Not every firm, but a lot of them do. And I think to demonstrate by maybe going to debriefings, which are super helpful, and going through and being like, look, these all sound exactly the same. How can we make a unique voice? And backing it up with facts. There's a lot of research out there, not that I have it at my fingertips to share with you right now, but A lot of these client surveys, I think one of my slides had a quote from one that spoke to the fact that, you know, people really want to have a sense of trust and partnership in terms of what they're getting. That's not going to come through in that typical flow of a cover letter that everyone, you know, is accustomed to doing a save as and starting with. I do recognize that it's tough, and a lot of firms are old school and they're like, well, we won, why would we change the way we did it? We got the Ridgefield project with that letter, so why wouldn't we get Vernon? Well, you know, sometimes you got to change it up, and you won't know unless you try, and there could be some naysayers that the first time you try it, you don't get shortlisted. They're like, it's because you wrote the cover letter like Lindsey said. And, you know, it's probably not. There's probably other factors, but I would say experiment. And oops, my goodness. Hold on, guys. Okay, so sorry about that. I thought I turned off all my iPhone and related things, but my bad. You guys still see my screen?
Yep, we're good.
Oh, sorry about that. FaceTime. I'm gonna have to just turn my phone off maybe. But that threw me through a ringer. I was talking about cover letters, and I was saying, yeah, you got to experiment, and maybe it's not a complete overhaul, but maybe it's the first paragraph, you know, where you're like, hey, this is important, Karen, we've done our homework, and we're going to show you why. Started in 1897, or, you know, our firm did this. So you could maybe blend the two, but pepper some life into these letters, and encourage your leadership to try it, and offer to do the work. Like, you know, meet with them, because they're gonna be like, I don't know how to write that. So, all right, well, let's extract those ideas out of your brain. Let's talk about some of those softer points, some of those other things that could convey some messages. Let me start a letter and have you weigh in on it. Start small, because it is an overhaul for a lot of firms. I do get that.
Yeah, I think there's some validity too in like pinpointing the person in leadership that you think is most likely to be on your team about it.
Yeah.
And you know, educate them, focus on them, like pick one person, and if you can get them on board, you know, they might be able to get other people on board.
Yeah.
So, and
go ahead.
A great book to read and it could really help with cover letters is Donald Miller's How to Build a Story Brand. And it'll really show you like what's important in that cover letter. So I just a little throwing a rec in. So we've gotten 2 questions, and these are going to be our last. They're very similar, so I'm just going to read one. And it's going to be the last question we take. So if you're limited on time, what's the best area to focus on to customize?
Great question. And just real quick to the cover letter, I just want to make one more point. Know your audience, because not every audience is going to appreciate a letter written in that fashion. For the Boys and Girls Club example, awesome. For a sewer reconstruction in the city of Springfield, Illinois, you know, it might not fly like that. So you might go with more of a conservative traditional approach. So please know that I put that out there as a statement. Just know your audience and their I guess, ability to kind of take a letter like that in. So if you're limited on time, which we all are, I like to think that the cover letter and the project sheets are really the points that I would really focus on, because at the end of the day, I'm thinking people, the cover letter can really drive home those points, those evaluation criteria, and people are always going to read that. It's first. They may lose steam as they go through some of the rest of the sections, but that will set the tone for what they're about to see. And at the end of the day, people want to know that you've done what they're asking you to do. Like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to build me a website. I've never done any websites. Well, then I'm probably not going to pick you. They want to know that you've done, like, even when I go after projects, people, there's a sense of comfort that I work with AEC firms. I work with firms like you. I've done projects just like this for other firms. Draw, you know, focus on that. And I think really use call out boxes and things to kind of address those criteria. Like, this is LEED certified, check. You know, this involved OSCG&R coordination, check. We had to, whatever, call them out on the standard project sheets, but drive home the point that you've done work similar in size, scope, and complexity to what they're looking for. That's probably one of the most important things beyond the softer stuff that they want to see.
Yeah, we've got a comment here. We've heard from clients that they read the cover letter, then flip straight to the fees. I've definitely heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah, and put time and effort into the fee, man. Sharpen your pencils, because a lot of times people do that. And, you know, the approach and everything else you're selling can really, you know, back up that value. If your fee is a little bit off, or frankly, even considerably higher than someone, you need to sell the value. But that's true. They start there. They want to see what they're looking at from a number, and then they might go back into the middle. So keep that in mind, and just really try to take those standard materials that go into all of these submittals and try to just doctor them up to show that you know what these people want to see and hear in their submittal. And that is the best advice that I can give you. This last slide, and I know we're way over on time, so I appreciate you guys sticking in there through all the technology, through the iPhone call coming in on my screen. God bless us all. But basically, I like to close by saying, get your geese in a row, not your ducks, get your geese in a row. You know, put in the work, do the due diligence, figure stuff out, do your pre-positioning. Get people involved to help with these proposals, even if it's not the project manager. You may have someone that's just an awesome technical writer that's super responsive and always available and appreciates the work that goes into these proposals. Maybe your PM is not that person. Work with the other person, let them ghostwrite, you know, bring in these resources to help your team put the best foot forward. Make sure all your past write-ups and submittals are searchable and organized in a way that you can find stuff. I'm constantly like, not only when did I write that paragraph about high performance buildings and which firm was it for? So there's like a double thing that I'm doing. You know, make sure that you've got these write-ups accessible, whether it's a database or just a simple Word doc that you can search in. You know, schedule stuff in your calendar and the calendars of people that are helping you with stuff, and make sure you build in time for cleaning up not only the tone but the graphics and then the printing and the delivery and all of that comes after you do the hard work of putting this thing together. And debrief. You know, a lot of times people will say, listen, all the firms that submitted were qualified, anyone could have done the job. I've heard that too many times, and it's just like, ugh, give me what I really want to know. You know, go through these debriefs. Sometimes they're painful. You hear things, you see things you don't want to hear, but it's going to help you grow. Look at the competition's proposals when they're available, like in a public sector situation for sure, and learn from them. Wow, these people can show, it may show you some weaknesses that you need to make some strategic decisions on to hire, to counteract, or to, you know, add a service, whatever the case may be. But look at what you're up against and get it straight from the horse's mouth in terms of debrief information. It'll help you for your next one. And I hope that these ideas that I kicked around today with you all virtually have inspired you. Again, RFPs can be difficult. They can burn you out, particularly if you have a bunch of them in a row. But if you can go that extra mile, you'll feel better about it. Your team will feel better about it. And it may be a good, you know, place to have some different components to pull from your next one. So your efforts aren't in vain. It does matter. People do read this stuff. It looks good. It feels good. It sounds good. And it's going to help you get your next job. And I want to thank you all for being on my webinar today, participating, and being interested in this topic of proposals. That gets me jazzed up. I don't know why. After this many years, it still gets me jazzed up, but you got to keep it creative. Please reach out if you have any questions. I put my contact information there. You can learn more about me on my website, and feel free to email me with any questions. I'd be happy to talk with any of you guys one-on-one about the specific things you're dealing with at your firm, and even give you some advice just on where to start. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsey. You great job. I know I would have been much more flustered having all the pivoting. So, and thanks for everybody for bearing with us and flipping on over to Zoom. I mean, hey, you know, what is life? This is life now. We're all learning together. And join us for our next webinar. It's going to be on May 13th. It's free and open to members and non-members alike. And we're going to be talking about creating an effective roadmap for AEC market research and analysis. So I hope you guys can head on over to smps.ct.org and sign up for that. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.